afternoon. The December 14th, 2021 Policies Work Session is now in session. Pam, roll call, please.
Mrs. Belford?
Present.
Ms. McDougall?
Present.
Mrs. Jenkins?
Present.
Mr. Susan?
Present.
And Mrs. Campbell?
Present.
Will everyone please stand for the pledge? Pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Board members, this is our opportunity to review and discuss these policies as well as make suggestions for changes. We'll begin with Policy 5517, Anti-Harassment. Chris Moore, Assistant Superintendent of Student Services, and Valerie Landano, Assistant General Counsel, will provide us the executive summary.
All right, I'm going to provide the executive summary, and Valerie's going to answer all the questions. All right. Policy 5517, Anti-Harassment Compliance Officers Compliant and Investigative Procedures. This policy is being revised to conform to the latest Neola template. This policy revision cross-references and incorporates updates related to the 2020 Title IX federal regulations as reflected in the new policy 2266, non-discrimination on the basis of sex in education programs and activities. Compliance officer information and record retention provisions have been updated along with other miscellaneous updates suggested by Neola. These proposed revisions encompass the suggested language from Neola.
Any board members have comments, questions, suggestions on Policy 5517? Ms. Campbell.
Sorry, I'm just getting my stuff together. So I just sent a couple of just little corrections. I think Valerie's already got them. But is this the one where we needed, there were a few that we talked about that the language needs to be consistent between 5517 and 2260, and there was one other one.
2266.
Thank you, 2266, about students being required or being encouraged to report.
I think it's the other one because I had the same comment.
Okay, so this is the one where it actually says they're encouraged.
Yeah.
So I guess that my question will come around when we get to the other policies, is that we would leave them all consistently the same way.
Yeah.
So in this one, then I think the wording is better on 5517, so I'm good.
Any other comments, questions, suggestions on Policy 5517? All right, then we will move along to 5517.01, Bullying and/or Harassment. Ms. Moore and Ms. Landano will provide the executive summary.
This policy has been revised to cross-reference the new policy 2266 and require that reports of sexual or gender-based harassment first be evaluated by a Title IX coordinator for applicability of the Title IX grievance process. After screening, any reports deemed not to fall under the scope of Title IX would be addressed through this policy. Any reports falling under the Title IX must instead be addressed through the grievance process in Policy 2266. Clarification has been added regarding school days. Additionally, an amendment is presented to cross-reference the appeals process in Policy 2260.01 applicable to bullying and/or harassment cases. Finally, the training materials references have been updated. The proposed amendments did not arise from an updated Neola template. Instead, they were initiated by BPS Legal Counsel in consultation with Student Services.
Comments, questions on 5517.01? Got it right there? Nothing on this one, Ms. Campbell?
No, I don't think so.
Okay, super. Then we will move on to Policy 2260, Non-Discrimination and Access to Equal Educational Opportunity. Dr. Beth Theddy, Deputy Superintendent and Chief Human Resources Officer, will present the executive summary.
The purpose of the proposed replacement policy is to ensure compliance with all applicable federal and state laws, Florida State Board of Education rules, board policies, administrative rules, procedures, and guidelines. In addition, the proposed revisions promote transparency and accountability. The particular areas of revision or replacement include the following: complete replacement with Neola language, These proposed revisions encompass the suggested language from Neola.
Comments, questions, concerns on policy 2260?
This is the one. This is the policy that has the language that's different for students. And I lost, I think it's in C. Am I in the right section? Sorry, I'm on the wrong
Mallory,
version.
I know I sent you something. Can you remind us of the section that's
You did. Let me just find it real quick.
C. Oh no, that's not right. Never mind.
Right, but also Ms. Campbell wrote about 2260 with encouraged. I mean, I'm just doing word search in it real
Oh, that's
quick.
not in C.
Yeah, under section 4A is where it talks about the reporting. So currently, 2260 says students and board employees are required, and all other members of the school district, community, and third parties are encouraged to report. So that's one of those areas Ms. Campbell and I discussed a little bit when she was working through these. That's an optional feature, if you will, in the Neola template where you can choose encouraged or required. We just went with the default Neola template, but by all means we could and probably should, I agree with that observation, change that to encouraged for students.
Is any board member opposed to that requested change on the policy?
Okay, we'll do that before the next workshop.
Thank you, ma'am. Anything else on 2260? All right, the next is going to be policy 2260.01, anti-harassment and non-discrimination appeal procedures. Dr. Theddy and Ms. Moore are going to tag team on this one.
This policy is being revised, 2260.01. This policy is being revised to clarify the procedures regarding the process by which a complainant may file an appeal stemming from a complaint concerning alleged violations of the Florida Educational Equity Act, 1000.05, as addressed in policy 5517, anti-harassment compliance officers complaint and investigative procedures. The Jeffrey Johnson Stand Up for All Students Act, Florida Statute 1006.147, as addressed in policy 5517.01, bullying and harassment. Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act of 1973 and the Americans with Disabilities Act of 1990 as amended. Further, the policy is being revised to cross-reference the new policy 2266, non-discrimination on the basis of sex in education programs and activities. Clarify the appeals procedure for Title IX cases is addressed solely in policy 2266. These proposed revisions partially encompass the suggested language from Neola.
Comments, questions, suggestions on policy 2260.01?
I had asked, and I don't necessarily think it needs to be shorter or longer, but I had asked about 22, or about section B2. In the step 2 for the appeal, it says, if the informal discussion does not satisfactorily resolve the issue within 30 days, school days after the day of the informal discussion, the student and her parent may submit the written statement to request a formal appeal. Is there a reason for that time frame?
So I had looked into this briefly. I appreciate the question because actually I'd been working through this policy recently with a school that was working through a bullying appeal, and I thought to myself, 30 days seems like kind of a long window. And so I am not sure is the answer. What I would have to do is get back with our Neola attorney and really pin them down because this is a pretty old policy, and Brevard over the years has done some real customizing to it, and unfortunately, I don't have the institutional knowledge to know when and where and how did it come to land on 30 days. But what I can do in time for the workshop and between now and then is try to pinpoint with our attorney, is there any reason it needs to be 30 days? Because the only thing I can guess is if that could be a requirement tied to a Section 504 ADA type claim that requires a 30-day window. It's kind of a specific number, and it's a bigger number than you normally would have in an appeal process.
Well, and you would know the legal side of things more. I was trying to think of what scenarios would be in place. But at this point, someone has already gone through the informal resolution process, but is not satisfied. So they were giving them a whole 30 days to come back. You know, then if it's beyond the 30 days, then it's too late, or you have to start over, or
Yeah, I would interpret that if it's beyond 30, that it's untimely at that
Okay.
point.
Okay. I mean, and someone who's really going through this process with seriousness should probably be aware. I don't know that it ever comes up as a problem.
As a practical matter, Mike, because right now I'm receiving the bullying appeals, it tends to be very prompt. If a parent or a student, like very exceedingly prompt, if they want to appeal, they're aware of the process because it's outlined in the letter that they receive, and if they're going to appeal, they typically do it straight away.
Okay.
So, if
Thank
that
you.
helps.
Ms. McDougall, did you have a comment on this one? Okay. Any? Yeah, I read all the comments that went out, so I feel like probably the majority of them have been addressed, but yeah. Okay. Anyone else comment, question on 2260.01? All right, then we are going to move on to policy 2410, school health services. Ms. Moore? Sure, we can.
Oh, sorry, it's just that's the order I have it in.
Yeah, let's go for it. It's probably somewhere in here, but yeah.
I
Go for it.
personally really don't want to skip that one. That's the one policy that's caused the chain reaction of changes to all the other policies. So my heart was like skipping a beat. We can't skip that. Okay, I'll
Thank
do
you
this
for that
one.
correction. Ms. Londano, 2266.
Okay, great. This is a new policy. We're seeking to adopt the Neola template, and let me just read from Form D. You have the purpose of the proposed new policy is to ensure compliance with all applicable federal and state laws, Florida State Board of Education rules, board policies, administrative rules, procedures, and guidelines. In addition, the proposed new policy promotes transparency and accountability. This new policy is being proposed in light of changes to federal law. The Federal Department of Education issued historic and sweeping regulations governing the implementation of Title IX, with particular emphasis on the specific due process procedures that are mandated in cases of sexual harassment that occurs in the scope of our education programs and activities. The proposed new policy encompasses the suggested language from Neola, and the specific definitions presented herein are required by the federal regulations located in 34 CFR Part 106.
Thank you, Ms. Londano. Comments, questions on 2266?
This is enough.
You're good.
This was the last policy where we needed to get the language consistent, so I had written down an F2 in this policy. Right there. No. Oh, there's no F. There wasn't.
There was an F2.
There
I know
was an
there was.
F.
Yeah, F2 is, and I've already noted that change. That's the same thing we were just discussing of opting for students to be encouraged to report rather than required.
Right. Okay. So where did it go?
It is F2 if you're on the red line draft. So Neola doesn't break it down in the same way that our policy is broken down. But it's on page 53 of the PDF is the
Yeah,
F2.
the
red
clean
line.
copy, the last document in the
Oh, you know
is
what?
the
This
easiest
was
way.
the one that was weird because the clean copy and the red line copy weren't. Hold on. Oh, there it is. Yes. So if we can change that, right, so the students are encouraged. And then in H, and I shared this with London already. In H1, it talks about, if the Title IX coordinator is the person that someone's bringing a complaint against, that the complainant should submit their complaint to the superintendent, who will designate another person. But then F3, it talks about if the Title IX person is the person, then the superintendent will actually, H1 and F3, then the superintendent will actually do it himself. So it seems to me, unless there's a legal reason otherwise, it should be consistent.
Okay, let me just.
H1 says, maybe it's because I was looking at the red line. H1 says a complaint should submit the superintendent, who will designate another person to serve in the place. And then in F3, it says the superintendent will then serve in the place of the Title IX coordinator.
Okay, that's a good catch. I would recommend making them consistent with H1,
Okay.
that the superintendent could designate another person.
Okay.
Everybody's good with that.
It's similar
Yeah.
things, but it's just listed differently. So
He could certainly designate himself. That's always an option.
if you don't have anything else to do that
I'm sure
day.
he's eager to fill
But I
that
think
role.
that, I think that would afford us more flexibility, and there's no reason why we can't go that route, so yeah.
And as a Title IX coordinator, please don't ever put us in that situation, right?
Yes.
Yeah, I can assure you,
There we go.
do everything possible to avoid that.
Anything else on 2266? Ms. Campbell, if I recall, I think this was the one where you had the question on board member knowledge.
Oh,
Reasonably should have known.
Yes, and Miss Landana answered that question for me in the email.
Okay.
Because this is new, correct?
Yeah.
So in F5, it specifically talks about that we are considered, even if we don't actually have knowledge, we are considered to have actual knowledge of sexual harassment or allegations of sexual harassment if one of our employees has knowledge. And so that's why it will be really important to make sure that our employees, that's not something we can opt out of, right? That's something that has to be in there because that's what the law says, correct?
Correct. Yeah, that term actual knowledge is one that I call a legal term of art. That phrase is in the regulations, and the meaning that it carries is that even if, it's an extensive interpretation. I was glad you flagged that because it's high on my radar too, as we're going to be rolling out new trainings, is that the implication is as broad as you think it might be. So a cafeteria worker or a bus driver or any of our staff or employees, wherever they are, if they overhear something, see something, they have actual knowledge of an incident that could meet one of the definitions of sexual harassment under Title IX, then the board is imputed with that knowledge. And yeah, that could carry legal liability. So training is a big deal. And my thought on that is, fortunately, we have a great new mechanism to get in front of all new employees with the live orientations on Friday. So my plan would be to add a slide on this and make sure, Paul or I personally deliver that training. So I would emphatically emphasize to new hires that this is a mandatory reporting area, but that is new, yeah.
Right. So just another thing
Yeah.
out there that we really don't have control over except for as good as the training is, So,
Right.
In the past, would we have been liable anyway, even without it being stated in policy?
Yeah, I think that's definitely true. Whether it's in the policy or not, that is federal law, and that's the trend that the court cases are going to, if anything, be cracking down more and more on that, in that direction. So training becomes really paramount.
Right, which is for the good of our students.
Yes.
Yep. All right, anything else on 2266? Thank you for catching that, Ms. Moore. And now we will move on to 2410.
All right, 2410, the proposed revisions do encompass the suggested language from Neola. Give you a little bit more information, and we'll add that for the next one, is that included in those suggested revisions, it revised the minimum provisions of the school health services plan, and we have aligned that with the DOH. It added the requirement to consult with a mental health professional prior to an involuntary examination of a student, as well as to notify the mobile response team, or MRT. It also added the requirement to notify our community about water safety and swimming certification courses.
Questions, comments?
So I didn't get a reply back from you yet, Ms. Moore, but I'm assuming you've got my questions. Did you get my questions about the dental program? Okay. Well,
I'm sure it's there.
Okay, I just
And
don't want to,
will
I
get
didn't want
you
to
the
throw
answer.
anything. So you probably have the answers for these. I just don't want to throw anything at you that you weren't
Okay.
aware of. So under A, number 5, there's a list of what is to be included in the school health services plan. And one of the very first things is a preventative dental program. So I know we have that with our Head Start. So is that because we have that in Head Start, or is that just?
There is more to it than just the Head Start program. I will
Okay.
get that information and get it to you.
Okay, but we're not about to start screening kids' teeth in our schools?
No, it's
Okay.
it's nothing new. It is something we have always done. There's nothing
Okay.
new we're adding to this.
Okay, good deal. And then in B1, so when it talks about involuntary examinations of students, my concern with this, and which we know that's Baker acting, right? we know what that is, and if we said Baker Act, people would know what that is. But this particular part of the policy comes right after we've been talking about things that happen in the clinic, right? Like you get your meds, you get your temperature taken, and all of a sudden involuntary examinations, which if I'm thinking about medical procedures, I'm thinking about a student who just is going to have something done to them without the knowledge, without their permission or their parents' knowledge or whatever. And, oh, and by the way, we're going to bring in law enforcement. So I'm just imagining what people might.
Misinterpret it, yeah.
You're right. So I don't want there to be any room. So is there a way we can kind of clarify what that is so people understand this is a mental health? I don't know how you want to word it, but when I first read that after looking through all the normal clinic type procedures, I thought, oh, that would be scary for someone who didn't know what that meant.
Yeah, if there's common understanding of the term Baker Act, we can certainly put that in parentheses if you guys agree. It certainly clarifies what it is, because you're right, it is not just a random evaluation or examination of a child by a clinic.
Right. And in today's
Sure.
atmosphere, it would probably be good to be really clear what that means.
Or would it be more appropriate, do you think, to say for an involuntary mental health examination? I don't know that they're ever going to call the Baker Act anything other than a Baker Act, but if they did decide that tomorrow it's going to be the Cookie Act instead of the Baker Act, then
Right.
we have a policy change we have to do.
Yeah.
Is
It
that,
it probably would be good to put it right at the top on B, like right at the heading of what this section is, involuntary examination, so people just understand that we're not talking about, lice and Band-Aids. I mean, we're
Right.
talking about something more serious.
So we're looking at B, involuntary mental health examinations of students. We're good with
Right.
that?
yeah, is that good with legal?
It works for her.
Thank you. All right.
I do want to say one thing before we move on, just so that everybody knows. There's a lot of policies here, and it would be remiss not to acknowledge the work of our directors and our assistant directors. I know Chris Reed is here, Justin's here. I know behind the scenes a lot of our assistant directors and directors work on these. And so while we represent them, they've done a lot of the hard work. So I just wanted to say thank you to them, because it's a lot.
Yes, thank you to all of you, because it was a lot just for review, so I can't imagine
The process.
the process of trying to make sure that all the i's are dotted and t's are crossed and all that. So we certainly appreciate that work. Anybody have anything else on 2410? No? Okay. Then we are moving on to 2431.03. Ms. Moore again.
Yeah, this is a new policy for concussions and head injuries. This policy is being added to clarify the procedures regarding participation in interscholastic athletics and other changes in compliance with FHSAA policies and procedures. We're pretty used to saying we're doing this because FHSAA said so. I think this just adds a little bit more power to that by saying, and it is a district board policy.
Anyone have any comments, questions on 2431.03?
Letter C talks about the CPR and the defibrillators. I'm just wondering if I were going to search through our policies, of course, I guess it would come up if you said something about that, but the policy is titled Concussion and Head Injuries, and all other things.
Right.
Should we?
There are other policies that talk about the AED and
Okay.
CPR, so it gets a little redundant.
Okay. So do we have that, because this specific, I know this is FHSAA required, that you have to have someone present at every athletic activity
Correct.
during the school year. But is that part in another policy?
That's a good question. I know that based on actually statute that came out in June, we let it be known this has to happen. So our schools are already practicing that. I'd have to go back and cross-reference that to make sure. But we did start implementing that based on statute this school year.
Good, thank you.
So if you read the statutes, it refers back to 2431.01. Oh, no, I'm sorry. What it does is it refers to allowing the superintendent to come up with policies and procedures in relation to the upcoming laws and requirements. Because they change so much, it gives the opportunity for the superintendent to do that. So inside of that, which is something we're talking about in the AEDs later, I was going to talk to the systems and checks and places and stuff like you said. So I just wanted to help everybody that it's inside the next couple that we have, and it refers back to his policies and procedures. So just to help you out. So.
Thank you. All right, nothing else on 2431.03. Then we are moving along to 2800, Educational Services for Students in Department of Juvenile Justice Educational Programs. Ms. Moore?
This policy is new, and it encompasses the proposed revisions from the suggested language of Neola. So Neola sent out suggested language to a policy we hadn't adopted yet, so we put it in place. Everything that was within the policy we were already doing, so it's just a matter of encoding that this is what the Neola suggests.
Comments, questions, or concerns on policy 2800? Okay. Next, then, Dr. Thuddy will present the executive summary for policy 3121, conditions for employment and re-employment of staff.
This policy is being revised for technical and content changes. Particular areas of revision include the following: the addition of paragraphs 3 and 4, which are really C and D, with suggested Neola language, and these proposed revisions encompass the suggested language from Neola.
Any questions or comments on policy 3121, conditions for employment? Okay, then we will move on to 3121.01. Dr. Thuddy?
This policy is criminal background and employment history checks. This policy is being revised for technical changes. Particular areas of revision include the following: the addition of suggested Neola language and the inclusion of all staff support and instructional. These proposed revisions encompass the suggested language from Neola.
Questions, comments, or concerns on 3121.01? All right, hearing none, we will move on to policy 3215, smoking and tobacco-free environment. Ms. Moore?
This policy, the proposed revisions encompasses the suggested languages of Neola. As you guys know, we just did 3215. We did major revisions. Most of the revisions this time are based on slight changes to the definition, as well as some language about violation of this policy for administrators and staff and for any persons allowed to accept or solicit contributions or to promote tobacco products on school property.
Any comments, questions, or concerns on policy 3215? Ms. McDougall, I think you had questions on that, but
One of the questions I had is, I know that we lease and rent out our buildings, so I just want to make sure that certainly pertains to them too. I didn't see that in here, but I don't know if that's in another contract or someplace else.
Yeah, it does pertain to them, and the way that they would handle if they wanted the venue to allow their participants to smoke is they would have to apply for a waiver to the board.
So it would come before us then?
It would come before you. It's part of the facilities use agreement, and then they'd have to come to you for a waiver.
Thank you. It might have been something else, but I can't remember.
There was another question about adding matches alongside
right.
a lighter as a prohibited.
I don't know if that's a big deal or not, but it's fire, so, okay. I mean, I just don't know if that would be, this may seem silly, but our students are very bright, and people are very bright for loopholes. And do I worry about that or not? So it's up, whatever you think, so.
I think it's a good addition. There's no reason for anybody to have matches or a lighter on campus unless it's part of an instructional lesson.
Chemistry.
Okay.
everybody good with that recommended change? All right, then we are going to move along to policy 3590, personnel file. Dr. Thuddy.
This policy is being revised for technical changes. Particular areas of revision include the addition of suggested Neola language and something I need to update on here, the addition of some statutory language. Proposed revisions encompass the suggested language from Neola.
Anyone have comments or questions on 3590 personnel file? Ms. McDougall, I think you submitted a couple of questions on there, but I don't recall that there were any changes.
I don't think there were changes. There was just clarification that Dr. Theddy and I talked about if something happened off out of Southside School.
If an arrest would appear in the personnel file, and my explanation or my answer to the board was the arrest wouldn't necessarily appear in a personnel file, but the investigative file would contain that information, and if the employee, the other piece you asked about, was if the employee resigned or was terminated during the pendency of that investigation, would that be in the file? And the answer to that is yes, and that's actually the new statutory language. And it specifically states the resignation or termination of an employee before an investigation of alleged misconduct by the employee that affects the health, safety, and welfare of a student is concluded must be clearly indicated in an employee's personnel file.
Thank you.
Anything else on 3590 personnel file? All right, then we will move along to the revisions to policy 5500 student conduct. Ms. Moore?
This proposed revision does encompass the suggested language from Neola. This revision specifically includes new language from State Statute 985.12 regarding civil citations.
Questions, comments, or concerns on policy 5500 student conduct?
We just changed this, right?
Yeah.
We worked with district security to make sure that we were in line with how law enforcement officers, how they make decisions around civil citations. The actual statute says we will encourage our law enforcement partners to offer civil citations when appropriate. So that's basically how we, with the help from our district security partners, phrase the language in here.
All right, hearing nothing else on 5500, we will move on to policy 5517.03, dating, violence, and abuse. Ms. Moore or Ms. Landano?
Minor changes are presented to coordinate with the addition of new policy 2266, non-discrimination on the basis of sex in education programs and activities, in light of changes to federal law under Title IX. The policy has been revised to appropriately cross-reference policy 2266 and require that reports of dating violence first be evaluated by the Title IX coordinator for applicability of the Title IX grievance process. After screening, any reports deemed not to fall under the scope of the Title IX would be addressed through this policy. Any reports falling under the scope of Title IX must instead be addressed through the grievance process set out in policy 2266. The proposed amendments did not arise from an updated Neola template. Instead, they were initiated by BPS Legal Counsel in consultation with Neola's legal counsel.
Comments, questions, or concerns on 5517.03? Ms. McDougall, I think you had questions, but I don't think there were requested changes, if I recall.
I think legal and I talked about, wasn't there a checklist that we talked about? I just wanted to make sure that there wasn't a time gap between going back and forth between Title IX and our people who are going to investigate it. Like, so there's not a gap, and we're going back and forth. And I think we talked about a checklist, you said.
Yes, we did talk about that, and then I put that in an email to the board on December 8th, so you have it for reference there. But what we discussed is this will be a new process that we'll develop. My plan is to borrow from our friends in Orange County who have developed a very handy one-page checklist so that immediately upon the report of an incident of dating violence, the process would flow directly to the Title IX coordinator at the school, the deputy coordinator, or the district coordinator, who's currently myself. And very quickly, we'd fill out that one-page assessment to just kind of get it tracked in the right place. Does it need to follow 2266 process, or does it need to follow this 5517.03 process? And just as an aside, the reason I initiated this revision is I was looking at it and I realized, okay, the new Title IX regs cover dating violence, and so therefore I felt like this was a duplicate policy, and I questioned whether it was redundant or confusing and could we eliminate it. So I had a discussion with our Neola attorney about, can we just repeal 5517.03 in light of the new 2266? And the answer was no, because there's a specific Florida statute that kind of has a slightly different definition, like a lesser standard definition of dating violence, and we have to keep this policy. So regrettably, I mean, there's some confusion there, but I hope to very quickly do the training and implementation of the identification, that early assessment. So we didn't put a time frame in the policy, and we certainly could if you feel that's important. I will add it to the administrative procedures as we develop that for Title IX in general, that those assessments would be turned around, I mean, I think within 48 hours or just immediately.
Thank you.
So can I follow up? So several of these, or at least this one and the one that you were referring to, doesn't it have somewhat to do with like where it takes place? So this could be something that's completely separate from what happens on a school campus, but it's, again, one of our staff becoming similar to Ms. Moore. We had this conversation about, our families making school aware that something's going on outside that we need to be aware of because it may affect the students. We want to know what's going on in our kids' lives when they're struggling. But this kind of policy sets in place what we do when we find out that something's happening outside of school, whereas what the other policy really has more to do with when it's going on our campus. Am I understanding that correctly?
Yes and no. I think both. The main difference in my mind is 551703, that's under state law, 2266 under federal law. Both of them are going to have a jurisdictional component, so you'd have to look at that as it comes in. If you have like a boyfriend-girlfriend type scenario and one of them punches the other in a hallway and somebody sees it, an employee, that actually would fall under Title IX, surprisingly, even though it wasn't sexual in nature because there was a romantic relationship, it actually is Title IX. So that's the importance of the trained Title IX coordinator to conduct that assessment. But the basic gist of the jurisdictional analysis is if it happens on our campus or in the scope of our program or activity, even on a weekend during a sporting event, then it would fall under one or the other of these policies. If it happens off campus and it gets reported on campus, I still would want to treat it through Title IX with supportive measures, and the way that you would do a Title IX is even if we can't discipline the activity because it didn't happen on our campus, we still would want to reach out and offer counseling and supports and document all of that, and we would address the so-called downstream effects if it's affecting the student's ability to concentrate in school, for example.
Right. Okay, thank you.
All right. Anything else on 5517.03? Then we will move along to 5610.05. Ms. Moore?
This is a new policy for us, participation in extracurricular activities. This policy is being adopted to clarify the procedures regarding participation in extracurricular activities and other changes in compliance with applicable Florida law. This makes consistent how our student athletes participate in events when being disciplined or when having other instances. It's no longer school by school. This is board policy.
Comments, questions, or concerns on this one?
So is the athletic code of conduct is something that some schools had and some schools didn't? Is that
That's
what?
correct.
Okay. We didn't have it district-wide.
We do not.
5610.05, extracurricular?
Yeah, I got it. When you get a chance. Am I good to go?
I'm done.
So one of the issues that, this is great opportunity and everything else, there's two things that happen here. Section 2 of subsection 2 of Section B says to refer to 2431.01, participation by transfer students policy for if the person's allowed to participate, right? That gives that policy talks specifically to giving the superintendent the opportunity to draw those things. It doesn't say what those criteria are. It just says that the superintendent can make those things. So what I would like to do is whatever those are, be able to publish for our families so that they understand. Because one of the issues that we have is that homeschool families and families that are outside of the scope like to participate in our sports, right? When they do that, one of the issues they have is they're not sure what those rules and regulations are. It's a barrier that's existed that's gotten better, but in recent years it might come up again. So the one thing there that I would mention is Dr. Mullins, if there's a way for us to publish part of that so that they understand it, or a way, because when they're looking inside the policy, they're not going to see it, right? That's something we can work on in the future. It's not something we need to do now.
Yes, yeah, we'll take care of that.
Okay, and then the other thing is that where I really was like, hey, wait a minute, we might be doing something here. Students prohibited from participating in all or part of extracurricular activities are not entitled to further notice, hearing, or appeal rights. So if you have a student that's like, hey, why am I not able to? Is there a trigger or some sort of an email as to why they would be? Because I know that the ultimate, so if a student is prohibited from participating, there's no way, according to this policy, that they can then approach somebody with it, right? I understand that, but is there a way that, is there a trigger for us to find out and to say, hey, maybe that's not fair? Because sometimes, I've been out in the sporting world, coaches, somebody else may skew something because they don't want the kid out there and it's not fair, quite frankly.
Well, I think what I'm reading this, Mr. Susan, is that this is because of a discipline issue, that they broke the discipline code of conduct. And I think there is an appeal if there's, well, there is, because we see them all the time.
We see requests for it all the time.
That's right.
I'm not asking for change in it. I'm just asking to work with you, Dr. Mullins, on how that works for the family so that they would know. That's all.
Yeah, I think interestingly, but what we haven't put out there is Dr. Ramjit has been working on a athletic director handbook.
Beautiful.
And within the handbook, it's enshrining all of
That's it.
these things. What I'm hearing you say is you'd like some procedures around this. Hey, guess what? This is the rule you broke, and now this is one of the other consequences to it. So we can add that within the handbook or as an administrative procedure, but that is what he has been working on.
Yeah, and that's perfect. And having that out, kind of like the FHSAA rule book, something like that. And then having that available for families to be able to also follow keeps the accountability level and transparency at a good level. That's all.
Yeah,
That's just something I saw. So thank you. That's all.
perfect.
Oh, wait, hang on. I was just trying to look up this policy that Mr. Susan was talking about in B2, and I'm not finding a 2431.01.
I found it. Go to.
No, that's 30.01. I'm wondering if it needs to be under just 2431 interscholastic. I wonder if that was a Neola. In our- Just make sure we got the right policy
I will
there.
double check that, yeah, I'll review
Okay.
that. I hesitated to say, I know what we do is follow the FHSAA language on transfer student participation without having it all right there in front of me, but we'll double check it, we'll tighten it up, and we'll get it right.
Yeah, I mean, because it may be in 2431, but we just want to make sure that we've got that right policy. If we need a 2431.01, then there's the
And
next step.
And the other thing is that the reason for it is not all schools follow or play in the FHSAA rules, so,
Yep.
you know.
All right, thank you.
Yep.
All right, hearing nothing else on that one, we're ready for the executive summary of Board Policy 5780, Student Rights and Parents' Rights. Russ Bruin, Chief Strategic Communication Officer, will be presenting.
This policy is being revised to bring it up to date with Neola version and to be in compliance with Florida law. These proposed revisions do encompass the suggested language from Neola.
How did this fall on your plate, Mr. Bruin?
I was wondering if that was going to be asked. I've asked that also. I think there's a lot of, inside the policy, there are student records, which falls under GCR, and there's also a different divisions at the district that are impacted, and so they played their role in getting this policy kind of written, and so I'm just kind of wrangling it.
All righty, well, thank you for wrangling. All right, comments, questions, or concerns on Policy 5780, Student Rights and Parents' Rights?
Yes, ma'am.
Ms. Campbell?
And actually, this might be a Chris Moore question, so I'll let you punt if we need to. I had brought up E1 and E2. When it talks about health issues, the way that's worded, I'm just reading it plain. It sounds like the parents are exempt from health exams and the parents are exempt from immunizations, not the students. And I don't know
Yeah,
that
I
we
don't have it in front of me, I'm sorry.
It's, yeah, E1 says, the parent of any student shall be exempt from the requirement of a health examination. And then blah, blah, blah. And then number 2 for immunization says, the parent of any student shall be exempt from the school immunization requirements.
Got it. We will make sure the language reads, the parent of any student The parent of any student shall be able to exempt their child from the requirement of it. We'll fix that language.
There we go. Okay, thank you.
E1 and 2.
Just, yeah, those are the only two that I saw, because everything else was pretty clear it was about the student. It was just E1 and 2.
Thank you.
And then in J, I gotta get there. This is a long one. In J, under the non-discrimination, I noticed that Neola had suggested in several of these other policies to take out, to change it from transgender status to just gender status. I'm not sure why, but I thought if we're going to make all those changes to the other policies that we talked about at the beginning, maybe we just be consistent and do it the same here. That was, I know it was in a 5517, but I think I saw it in a couple different places. And again, there was an explanation, but must well make them look all the same.
We'll look at that.
Okay, and then S5. We actually don't have it officially adopted tonight because I think we're voting on it tonight. But this one, it has to do with parent access to instructional materials. And in the parentheses, it says, see policy 2520, selection and adoption of instructional materials. But if I remember our policies correctly, the one that we'll be voting on tonight, the revision of 2521, or was that a new one? It actually, they moved all the, or some of the appeal processes to that one. So I think we might want to consider, especially after we vote on it, either just adding 2521 so people will know where to look, because one of them had to do with how we go through when we do official textbook adoption, and then the other one has that in there and also has the process for not official textbooks, but other instructional materials. So once we get it voted on and it's officially one of our policies, assuming everything passes tonight, then we want to include 2521 in that
We'll
item.
update it after tonight. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. That's all I have.
Thank you, Ms. Campbell. Anything else on policy 5780? All right, then that is going to take us to policy 8330, student records. Ms. Moore.
This policy is being revised for technical changes only. The proposed revisions encompass suggested language from Neola. The one thing that this policy reinforces is that even if a child is being investigated by law enforcement or is being reviewed for DCF, they don't lose their student record privacy rights, and that is stated very, very specifically in the new language.
Comments or questions on this one? Okay. Ms. Campbell, we had conversation previously about modifying our language around what is available
Directory
in
information.
directory information. Did that?
We actually just revised this policy in May.
Yep.
Yeah.
And the one, there's several that I was like, we just did that one. Like
yep.
some, like we really, literally just voted on it at the last board meeting.
Yep.
That, if you look down in the director information section, which I'm looking at the red line copy, it's in, from the packets in page 47. We did remove, I believe it was place of birth.
And an email, there was another one, I think it was email address.
Yeah. So what is left are really things that we need to put out in one way or another, whether it's because of
Yearbook.
awards programs or recognitions and things like that, athletics. So that was the one big one that we did remove that, and because we did have that conversation. So yes, thank you for remembering.
Okay. Just wanted to make sure we're still covered with your concerns.
Yep, yep.
I think one of the important things for us to recognize about this policy is when DCF comes to do an investigation, we want to support them. I mean, they're doing critical, important safety work, but we still have to follow FERPA. And one of the things that we have trained our staff to do is they can't respond to give me, here, fill out this piece of paper for me, or give me these records. but we can respond with information that's personally known to us. So if a DCF worker has questions of a counselor, a social worker, an assistant principal, a principal, and are asking questions about what they personally know about the student and the student's life situation, we can answer. We just can't respond by either giving records or looking information up on the records to respond. And so we have a great relationship with DCF. They understand what our limitations are, and our folks have been trained to understand what they're allowed to give and how they're allowed to aid and support an investigation.
So Ms. Moore, just for clarification on that, does that mean that if they come to the, say, somehow DCF gets involved with the minor, and they come to the school and they need a home address,
Yes,
we cannot give it to them?
we can. That's directory information.
Okay, so as long as it's included in that directory information, we can share any of that. We just couldn't go into things outside of that scope.
Correct.
Okay.
Oftentimes, they want to know whether they have an IEP or a 504 and their progress in classes, and that's information we cannot give. And so, I feel like we've gotten better at, it used to be that DCF workers would send us a notification with a bunch of questions and they would ship it off to us, and our people would call us and say, I don't know what to do, and our answer is do nothing. Reach out and say, I'll be happy to talk to you with information that's personally known to me, or supply them only with the directory information that you're allowed to supply them with. And then we always send them the list of what directory information is.
Right. So how does that interact with our threat assessment teams? Because some of that information does need to be shared within that venue, correct?
That is correct. The threat assessment legal language is very specific. If there's a serious substantive threat, that means all agencies can communicate with one another about what that threat is. So when we meet as a team and we are talking to DCF and law enforcement, we have the legal standing. A threat assessment process has already taken place. We have the legal standing to share that information because it's of safety and health concerns.
Okay. Thank you for that clarification. All right, that is going to move us to Mr. Novelli, Policy 8405, School Safety and Security Threat Assessment Teams.
8405. This policy is being revised based on Neola recommendations. There you go. To be compliant to the new Florida Administrative Code 6A-1.0018, school safety requirements and monitoring, related to district school safety specialist responsibilities, threat team responsibilities, and school environmental safety incident reporting. These proposed revisions encompass suggested language from Neola.
Questions, comments, or concerns on Policy 8405, School Safety and Security Threat Assessment Teams? Nothing?
The only question I asked was, who is the district safety security person? And then I found out it was Mr. Novelli. So he
Novelli is
wears
that
like
prize winner.
20 million hats here. So I wanted to thank him for all that.
Yes, and what a mountain he has climbed with that role, so.
Well, thank you for that. I appreciate that. But of course, without Major Neal and his support and his fellow law enforcement agency fellows in district security, as well as all of the municipalities that we have within our borders, my responsibility would have no power to get anything done. So we certainly appreciate Brian and all that they do from the Brevard Sheriff's Office.
Absolutely.
All right, that is going to move us on to 8407, Safe School Officers.
All right, 8407, Safe School Officers. This policy is being revised based on Neola recommendations to be compliant to the new Florida Administrative Code, 6A-1.0018, school safety requirements and monitoring. Related to safe school officer assignments and incidents. This proposed revision encompasses suggested language from Neola.
Questions, comments, or concerns on Policy 8407, Safe School Officers? No? All right, thank you, Mr. Novelli,
Thank you.
and thank you, Brian. We appreciate you as well. Our last policy for this afternoon is 8452, Automated External Defibrillators. Ms. Moore?
Yeah, the proposed revisions do encompass the suggested language from Neola. It made some very specific asks as far as AED training and CPR. We have been working with Jim Powers over in facilities to make sure that we are setting up procedures. We actually do have procedures on the book, but when Andrew and Jim sat down to review them, it became very clear that we needed to touch them up. So we'll have those ready for you before the next work session.
Those procedures are to check batteries at a certain interval.
That's correct.
Replace
Knows
pads.
where, make sure
Everybody
staff knows where they are and check some box at the beginning of the year and.
Yep.
Okay, and then, are we trying to educate any of the students on where the AEDs are? And I'll explain why. There was a couple of instances since I've been on the school board where a student goes down and the school, there's one teacher there. And they say to the student, go get the AED, it's in wherever. So then the student ran across campus to try to get to the AED. They're calling out, here's the other issue that happens, AED, we need an AED over here. What was happening was the other staff members were hearing, we needed an AD. They thought athletic director. So there was some communication barrier, and then the student went over there and couldn't find where the teacher was telling them to go. So I know you guys are working on that, but just to make sure that in that scope, we're working towards that. I had some of those taken care of. And then there's somebody that's really passionate about this that we all know, Mr. Sean Sema. I would love him to just have a conversation with what he does with our staff, just to kind of set direction with what he's seen out there. He's been working all over the state on it, just as a suggestive thing. Not as a, here's the rules, just here's what I've seen and this is what might work. Okay?
Yeah, do you have contact information?
Yep, I'll text it
Send
to you
me?
right now.
Perfect, thank you.
He's worked with every family that's gone through an AED trigger across the state of Florida. He'll know where our pitfalls are.
Awesome, thank you.
You just made Sean's day, by the way.
Oh, I'm sure.
All right. Hearing no further discussion, this meeting is now.
wait, wait,
Whoa,
wait, wait,
whoa,
What?
Ms. Belford, hang on a second.
Sorry. I thought you were just wrapping up the policy. So I just wanted to throw that out there. We have been asked by several members of the community to revisit our mask policy that we had in place for last year. Under current law, obviously we didn't use it this year because there's so many things that would make it, e-learning and several other things. So I was going to ask if we would consider either to repeal it or to heavily revise it, one way or the other. My preference would be just to repeal it, but we need to, there's a process. We can't do that. There was some, repeal it at the very next meeting. Well, we can't do that. There's a process, and even repealing takes the 3 meetings. So Paul's not here to advise us, Valerie, if you, of what the implications would be if we just want to think about it for right now. So obviously we can't take any action except for to make a suggestion to the superintendent.
What are you asking?
That if it so moves the board, that we go ahead and start the repeal process for that policy.
I'll second it. I'll support it.
So I will share with you that I've had some conversation with Paul on the issue because I got the requests as well on that. And it definitely is on his radar, but I think he was waiting to see how some things fleshed out because we've got some issues with federal direction and state direction and conflicts there. And so it's definitely in his queue. But I don't think he was ready to pull the trigger on going one direction or another on it. As you said, it's a process, and definitely the current policy is not, we couldn't institute it if he wanted to because of all of the language that's in that policy. So I don't know if you want to wait until Paul gets back and have that conversation with him and see what his recommendation is for going forward. I didn't push the issue partly because we have, over the next 2 months, we have enormous amounts
Right.
of policies that are coming forward. But I do know, like I said, that it's on his radar, and we've had some conversations about it and determining,
Well,
where
I
we need
thought-
to go going forward.
Mainly, I want to see, just if there's already, a movement of the majority of the board to go ahead and move in a certain direction, but if there's not, I certainly understand the wisdom of waiting, because he's already done his research on that. And like I said, nothing can be done today. right? Either way, because of the process that's required, which is what I tried to share with the people who reach out to us. Just like any other process, when we repeal a policy or revise, it has to go through the course.
Yep.
So, all right, yes, if when he returns, if we can, I wouldn't mind having a conversation with him as well, or all of us hearing together what he has to say.
So, Ms. Londano, I believe that I have a motion on the floor and a second on that motion. So do I need to take a vote on that motion, given the fact that
We
we?
can't vote in a work session,
Can't
can
vote.
we?
Right.
Yeah, I think because it's the work session, this is not the workshop. I think it's okay. I think you can just more have an informal discussion. To me, if the three of the five of you were like, yeah, we want to put this on towards the repeal, and we can put it on the docket, it doesn't mean it has to go forward. But I think the better wisdom is wait for Paul to come back, have some more conversation if everybody's good with that. And I don't think we need to do anything formal at this meeting.
I think there's also some sort of statutory rules and processes that if we have a policy that exists that goes against law, that it's almost like we don't need to remove it. But if we want to reshape the policy, then we go. But just because, like, to your point, like, you can't enact the policy that's on our books. So I think Paul will have an answer for that, too.
So just clarifying for procedure, and I don't need to respond to the fact that a motion was put on the table, right? We can just,
It was a suggestion.
it
I
was
think
just,
let's reclassify that as a suggestion if you're okay with that, Ms. Campbell. Is that okay?
all right. So Ms. Campbell had a
You made a motion
suggestion
by seconding it.
in which,
really make a motion.
I just meant,
He concurs.
I concur, whatever, second, right.
yes,
follow up with, I support it.
just making sure that we're doing everything procedurally right. The last thing that any of us needs is Paul to come back and have a fit because we did something we shouldn't have done or didn't do something we should have, right?
I knew you all would try to initiate me or throw me some sort of curveball, but I appreciate getting it out of the way during the work session and hopefully not later tonight.
And
if
we
you know what I'm
totally
saying.
didn't do that one on purpose, so.
And I didn't expect it to come from you, Ms. Campbell, so I'll just say, I'm impressed.
Are you going to say who you did expect it from?
No comment. I'll plead the fifth on that.
All right. Is there anything else before I say that there is no further business? All right. Hearing no further business, this meeting is now adjourned.